Hey guys, this is Kirob speaking, and in today's little dev update we are going to talk about the Rilma Open Alpha patch number 7, not 6. And that is a patch that we currently have in the works, which is basically getting us really close to the beta phase, as all the features by then are almost in, apart from like 1 or 2. And that means we are bringing back campaign. And today we are going to discuss what are the main new features of campaign mode, what are some of the nice improvements, and then also a little bit of an update on some engine designer simulation changes that are coming along with it. Alright, let's get started with campaign. And I guess we can just walk through some changes as I discover them in here. And the first one is very fundamental in nature. It is how you progress time. That has been a little bit on the clunky side, as you all know who have played campaign, with a timer running for when the month ends, and so we've changed that. There are now 2 options. Either you click here to advance a month instantly, or, well, with calculation time of course, or you use this handy new feature, which is basically a calendar that lets you fast forward to a specific date, where various important dates are marked with colors in the calendar. This spans some 10 years-ish here, as you see, and it is very easy to use it. You can either choose to have your UI update in the background, or well, in the foreground rather, while the time acceleration is running, and it's going to go as quickly as it can with just a frame in between thrown in there so that it remains responsive to you trying to stop the thing while it's in progress. But this will allow you to progress a little bit quicker if you want to, especially when you are toggling off this showing of the hub. That will allow you to just quickly simulate to a specific date. It will stop for whatever kind of situation you come to, the severity of the situation, like blocking issues, of course it stops for those. But you might want to stop for some warnings occurring, or just general notes and reports coming in. So this would work like this. You just go here, for instance, and it continues and simulates. Currently there's no actual start it button, it just goes automatically. Well, that didn't quite work yet, but I had to click 1 more month extra here, and now it has appeared as it should have, and it updates the UI. If you have selected to update the UI at all times, it will take a little time to refresh all of the data that you see on screen. So you can go either way. Especially in late game, this will be quite handy for you to just go and take a piss or whatever, and just set the time to simulate a year, and then you're off, you're good. Come back and it's mostly there, hopefully. So it's had a few performance upgrades as well, so hopefully things are going to go a little bit faster there. Another thing that you can see already here from this layout is the bottom bar has changed, and that is a pretty significant change to the flow of the campaign. Because what was definitely noticeable was how like stop and go the UI interactions feel in the campaign, and that is so far has been a really subpar UX user experience with too many loading screens and so on, and we're trying to get rid of as many as we can. And for that we have introduced a new concept of basically being able to go back and forth between these as tabs, and you no longer have any load screens between them necessarily. You still do have one load screen, for instance, if you go into the car designer or into the engine designer and so on. But then when you are within, it tries to not unload the scene, give you a load screen, and then present you with the new thing, but rather it unloads the current UI, shows you a loading screen background, and once the UI has loaded in, it slides it in. So that means that you don't have two transitions, but rather you have one transition, and when it's ready, you're good to go. And in the meantime, you're presented with the background loading screen image. And we're going to do some nice things with those too. We are, we are currently in the process of trying out some specific themed art, like the crisis meeting in Gazmere. That is just a sketch, by the way, but things are going to be more fleshed out, and we do have, as you can see, like some of you who know the Cyclist Tactics, playing in the same universe, will know that that certainly is a placeholder for automation. It's not supposed to be there, but it works great. Like you will get these load screens. What we are also going to do, well, not this one, that's for sure, but what we're also going to do is probably have them animated to a lesser degree, like little parallax effects and so on, just so that there's a bit more life in this, and especially for these backgrounds, we know it's dry, it's the spreadsheet simulator, and what we are aiming for in the longer run is to spice it up a bit, give it a bit more flavor and thematic artwork and so on, so that it doesn't feel as dry as it actually is, at the moment at least. Let's head over here to the factory manager and check that one out, because there are a few more new things in there, and one that you see here is Cell Factory and Plot. One thing that basically everyone who has played the campaign has pointed out that would be nice is getting rid of your old factories, and that is finally possible. And also, along with that, is the, design a factory, is the option to get smaller factories. We now do have, the tiny has changed in that it now is no longer just one size class, but 3 different size classes, like the small factory was before, and it still is. The previous tiny factory, the tiny option that you had in the Ellisbury update, is becoming tiny 3, so the largest of the tiny. Then you have Tiny 2, Tiny 1, it's really small, and then you have Micro, which is just a single kind of smallish shed. A proper start for any Achanen car builder. And that, of course, will be a lot harder to start. You can also select these to start with in the campaign setup, which we are going to get to. But another thing that you're seeing is, which probably, it generates a lure of error for now. No, go away. All right, I got rid of it. I should not, I should not poke it just yet. Don't poke the bear, the prototype bear. One thing that is going to be possible is to finally prototype not only engines, which was possible by not selecting a factory to produce them in. It is now a little bit less obtuse by actually selecting a factory that is supposed to be prototyping it. And that's not a factory building, it's your HQ doing that. So it has 0 production. You're not going to produce it if you put it into a prototype factory. It's kind of a crutch for us to handle that in the same system as we have in place already. But that should work really nicely if you want to do something like put a car or have a car developed in its first iteration and ready to be facelifted into its first proper production run. That is now going to be possible with choosing for this very first original facelift, the very first one that when you design the model, the first one that you do, the Mark 1. If you put that one into a prototype factory, then you will have no production. You can just instantly facelift it and then put it into a proper factory. And the same thing is true for engines, by the way. They work the exact same way. Also, contract factories are still there. Not for cars just yet. Maybe never, we don't know. That's something that remains to be seen. But potentially that would be an option as well. But for now, for engines you will have both prototype factories, in air quotes factories, it's not a factory, and contract, and then various size classes. But how does the prototype factory work then? Well, it is a prototype, right? So it is just assumed to have every add-on existing in the universe, so that you just can build with that. So you're doing everything by hand regardless. We're not quite sure if this one should be free or cost something, and I think in the end this will be basically done by the prototyping slots that will be available, more towards grand campaign development of the campaign, and that is tied to your HQ size. But wait, Kerob, HQ size is not a thing. Yes, you are correct, it's not yet a thing. That's also something that we're of course looking at, because there are exploits, let's call it what it is. some smaller, just insignificant little exploits that allow you to gain vast amounts of familiarity by just cranking out crazy amounts of prototypes for engines, and that is something that we do not want to encourage, and that is why in the long run what we are going to do is to have a certain number of slots that cost you money, of course, as well, where you can do prototyping, but not to the extent that you can with engines at the moment, where you just throw, oh yeah, let's just do 10 different engine families all at the same time, and they're all going to be basically the same engineering setup, so that I gain massive amounts of familiarity and then can make the real thing in no time once I want to. Yeah, it's a little bit of a waste of money, but still it's very potent, and it just clutters everything. And anyway, yep, that is prototyping. Yeah, once it's done, that's prototyping. Don't click this, Kerob. And there is another thing on here that you have already spotted, I'm sure, that is going to be quite helpful for anyone who was struggling with noticing what the regulations are for emissions and safety standards and so on. And what we're doing here is to have a proper dedicated page for the regulations, and as you can see, there is definitely one that was added, and that is capacity taxes. What capacity, you ask? Well, it is engine displacement or engine size that is being taxed in some countries, but not all, and they all have different standards. So let's talk about that a little bit. For now, these sliders are linked, by the way. It's nice. You can hover over to see the standards in Helvetia, for instance. I should first say what kind of taxes they are. In the black box, that is running costs, which is part of the black box that is affordability, both of which are supposed to be broken up eventually, sooner rather than later. There is a factor in there that is road taxes for vehicles, which always has existed, as have capacity taxes. They were a system that was with us since the key engine days, so very long standing, and they never really disappeared. It's just that they weren't hooked up to any values that were meaningful. So the system was there, but now we've rehooked it up and brought it to functioning. Not so sure if it's functioning at the moment. Maybe it's charging you a whole 2 cents or something on your extra on your car. But let's take a look at the most complex of countries, and that is Froenia. As you see here, these taxes don't change all that often. The bright green squares indicate when they do. So it's not like there's loads of guessing going on when what is. A few years, now and then, you will have to pay extra attention. But let's have a look. So, in Froenia, we have the most complex of setups, and that is that this road tax charge that is part of the affordability calculation for the various demographics. If you are running a sub 1 liter engine, then you are paying 1x the road taxes. This is not the sales price of the car. It is not the multiplier to running costs of the car, but it is a factor to just the tax amount, the road tax amount that is being paid every year, which is taken into account when people buy the car. So part of the costs will increase if you are in the, air quotes, wrong category for engine size. The impact of that, of course, needs to be nicely balanced and so on, which hasn't been done just yet, as I could not spot a significant difference in going between these brackets just yet. But that is something that is easy to balance out, to get in the ballpark and ready for you to play with once you get this version. Anyway, the way it's supposed to work, as you see here, is there are different classes. And if you're here, for instance, between 1 and 1.5 liters, they pay 50% more tax than when they are just below 1 liter, which incentivizes small engines in general. 3x the tax if you're between the massive sizes of 1.5 and 3 liters, and then if you're beyond the incredible size of 3 liter engines, you pay 10 times the tax, because Frenians hate Gasmians. And that is basically giving you some interesting incentives to potentially design engines a little differently and have the option of maybe making a different version for different markets, depending on their tax brackets. And with that in mind, you of course design your engines such that in the variant capacity, you might be sliding some sliders around to adhere to foreign tax brackets as well. The gist of this is, let's have a look at the modern standards here. The gist of this is that Ahana and Dalua have no capacity taxes whatsoever. Gasmir has the easiest of the capacity taxes, which, as you see here, is only going up to a multiplier of 2x. And that is not that big because, like I said, it's only a smallish part of the affordability calculations. But here in modern times, you see, more than 2.4 liters gets you into a higher tax bracket, and below 2.4 liters is the 1x bracket. And, well, that you could say is, 2.399 liter meta evolving, and that might be correct. That might be correct. Certainly would give you a little bit better affordability. Let's jump to Helvetia. They have one extra bracket there, and below 1.5 you're safe, and in between 2.4 they've synchronized it with Gasmir here. You pay a little extra, and then 3x for over 2.4. But Frenia, as we see here, they have also synchronized their standards towards the end and lowered them to be in line with the 2.4 limit. And if you make an engine, a massive engine that is 2.5 liters, sorry mate, you have to pay 10 times the amount of tax. Overall, the screen here is also an improvement in that we are going to list the cars that you have, which are the biggest offenders in each category. So we do have the emission standards here, safety and engine capacity, and these are going to be flagged with the different warning colors, like the green, like passing everything, yellow, like passing partially, and red, failing in basically all countries. And that is going to be quite handy when you're trying to find out why cars aren't selling and or what is costing you so that much. And we already did have that for the emissions regulations once they pop up. There, yes, cost of emissions. It has a little breakdown there, and this is just a much better breakdown of that, or is going to be that, once this is all hooked up properly. Going to show you a list of your trims and which ones are the worst at passing various regulations. But now let's take a look at what the new settings are for making a campaign. Let's start over here in the bestest of countries, which of course is Ahana. And me start out with this setting and then go into advanced mode and see what's there, right? All right, we of course still have the score multiplier that needs to be balanced a little bit, and I would say a lot of the smaller details in this, what you see here is not final, but you do see that we do have a new tab in here because it was getting a little full, and that is housing the new regulations and standards. And as you see here, you can go down to a micro factory if you wish, and this will probably be quite a hard start. No cash and micro factory, which, well, micro, you couldn't say it's a micro factory. It's a medium-sized shed. Should I even say it's a shed? It's more like a large garage. The various options have been tumbled around and replaced in more coherent fashion, placed on here on the UI, so that you have the company settings over here, then the market settings over here, and the regulations right towards the end. Let's take a look. Here is nothing new apart from the factory sizes, but here we have something that is really quite interesting. The competition slider, you know, but market desires is new. And that one is a little funny. Not quite sure if that is going to play super well, but it definitely will play very differently. What this slider does is that the demographic desires for car stats are going to be shifted from their main stats towards their secondary and tertiary stats. So if you have it all the way to generic, and everything they care about is like drivability and sportiness and comfort and safety and prestige, depending on the demographic, of course, still with their normal balance between them. But if you shift it towards focused, then they will not really care about the primary stats anymore, their drivability and sportiness, but rather 0 to 100 time and cornering Gs and engine capacity and all that stuff. So all the stats that the demographics already have, they're not adding things to it. But now all of a sudden your luxury premium vehicle is, or the demographic that likes these vehicles, is all about engine smoothness. They are complete nerds now. Like 30% of what they desire is a smooth engine. So this will change around how you will design cars, because and I'm not saying this is going to be great. I'm saying this is going to be very different. So if you want to have a very different experience playing the game, then this will be a cool slider to use. In the middle, standard, that is how the demographics are designed. With the Ellisbury update, what we wanted to do is test how the new emissions regulation stuff is working, and we found that it's working really well. It is giving players a hard time, which it should. That's the very, very much the intent. And now that everyone had to suffer through that, we are now giving you the option to customize it to your liking. Not only that, but we are also going to do that for both safety and capacity taxes. Safety regulations and capacity taxes. And the settings that you have here are, I think, pretty self-explanatory, but let me just quickly go through this. So for the emissions regulations, you can offset the year in which they are all the new standards are being applied. So if you want to have an easier game where it's much more relaxed, if you set it to plus 10 years, well, then you have all the new engine tech already available to reduce emissions when the emission standard finally comes in, and you will have a much easier time passing them. If you want to have a really hard game, pulling them forwards 5 years might be giving you a pretty good run there. So that is the regulations for emissions. For safety, it's working similarly, but not by shifting the years. Rather, it's just shifting the standards. If the standard is asking for 40 safety, then with a setting to -10, it will ask for 30 instead. Capacity taxes, on the other hand, are also very straightforward. They're just being multiplied down or up, if you so wish. If you want to play a game where only small engines are viable, then maybe put it onto 2x here. Yeah, basically handicapping your competition if you're playing a key car company, huh? So the way this works is that there are two things that are guaranteed, and that is death and taxes, right? So you always pay 100% road tax, but the displacement tax that is being multiplied on top is being attenuated down by this factor, or up, for that, amplified up for that matter. So, for instance, if it says that if you build a 3.5 liter engine in Frenia and you have a 10x displacement tax on top, then with the setting at 0.6 you will only pay 6 times as much. Setting it to none will just mean that everyone pays as if there were no displacement taxes. You will still pay, the customers will still pay the road tax, of course. That's also a cool thing. You can play a game without any emission standards by just setting them to none. That will change the way you play the game quite a bit, because you don't need all that pesky emissions control stuff. Catalytic converters are just, why would you have them? And you can do other things then, like the proper revival or the not dying off of naturally aspirated engines, because you just make them bigger and more powerful instead, and more high revving, instead of having to put on turbochargers and things. On the other hand, you might want to play like this, capacity taxes 2x, to incentivize more use of turbochargers, or twin charging and whatnot. And if you play like a Volvo-like company, you might want to put it on this, because you don't care, but the competition sure does. And whenever you are in the designers, and you don't have access to the main hub's full page of regulations, you always have it also from the drop-down. While we are not currently in the designer, I don't know why the button is right here, if you can... Oh no, that makes sense for it to be here, because you want to see what the standards then actually are, and what the tax limits are with your setup. But this button is available whenever you're designing things, so that you just can quickly drop it down to recheck what is currently going on, what you need to adhere to, and how it is going to change in the years to come. So what is the current status of campaign implementation? Well, it is back to life, it is running, and throwing quite a lot of errors. So we're going to get rid of those and then put it into proper beta testing. And from there, we're going to release it to you in patch number 7. The rough timeline for that is 2 to 3 weeks from now. Like I said last time, we are going to disappear for a while. Now this disappearance has stopped, and I'm here. But now everything is mostly implemented, and we just need to fix it up so that it's running without too many issues, too many sticks thrown into your spokes. And then we are ready to release this. Another kind of important thing that I probably should have mentioned right at the start is the situation with the Mac build. We do have the Mac build running for patch number 7, so that is definitely going to be back with the next update, but it's not going to be back for the main branch, because that is not really fixable. And that means that Mac users will have to switch to the Open Alpha and soon to be Beta. Well, they don't have to. We're not forcing you, but if you want to play the game, then you have to. Alright, let's switch gears a little bit by taking a look at some of the new engine simulation changes. And for that, we are going to go over to our standalone engine prototype. Alright, where to start, really? There are quite a lot of changes that are coming, and I'm showing you them here because there are still some visualization issues with these in automation as we speak, and that is going to be fixed up in the next few days. But I certainly want to walk you through the changes that are mostly behind the scenes anyway, in here, so that we do have the visualization up. The first thing I would like to mention is that in the previous version, in patch number 6, we did have the introduction of the proper mapping of lambda versus the manifold absolute pressure and RPM, of course. And with that, we had some weird behaviors in terms of emissions, especially in connection with catalytic converters. Most of that was down to the mapping having changed and the lambda area slider not being updated to this change. That has now been fixed, remodeled a little bit, and the progression is such that it now, again, works as intended. So if I now here increase the emissions adaptation in steps of 10, you see that it takes away the lean area there and goes beyond. And then if you are, you see this manifold absolute pressure being 1 here, that is the absolute maximum that you can theoretically reach. That's the mean pressure. Of course, you can have point pressures that are higher than that, depending on your resonances and such. That is calculated in a different way, though, so this is the mean pressure. And you can see that it's leaning out even beyond 1, and that is because there is some room for turbos to run as well. Run lean all the way up to like 1.5 bars of absolute pressure. So you do have a lot bigger range to play with. And that should work out to everyone's advantage, be it naturally aspirated or turbocharged or forced induction engines. The fuel map itself has not really changed, I believe. It's or minor tweaks only. And as you see here, this for this example engines, it goes all the way from super lean over a broad range to basically only being confined to super lean running at low RPM with lower pressures. So that's a nice fix, but it's certainly not a new feature. A new feature that needs to be talked about is, and probably the biggest one here, is that I've changed the way that fuel systems do timing. And now, especially older fuel systems are quite a bit changed, and that's why we do need a complete, in closed beta that is, a complete rebalancing run to make sure that engine performance is still correct after the change and or being has to be tweaked towards being correct again after the change. But what has happened? Well, what has happened is that now fuel systems can adapt timing in limited capacity. If you have full electronic fuel injection and an ECU, you can do a lot more than with a single barrel old carb. And the way this is modeled is quite straightforward, in that what does happen behind the scenes is that for full throttle, the simulation runs once, so at 100% throttle, just one calculation is done for the full rev range. And in that calculation, it looks at what the optimal timing would be. Then it looks at the fuel system and tries to see like, okay, what kind of type are you? How adaptable are you in terms of timing? How much margin do you need for every RPM to not run into knock? Which basically boils down to how good are your sensors? And this is basically what you see visualized here. This will be different in automation, of course, but you might remember that my version of this does have these lines, or one of the lines, you know. This is the timing line that you see here in the thicker line, and the optimal timing you see in the thinner line down here. And this is currently set so that 200 is no timing advance. This is the neutral position. And what I mean by no timing advance is relative to peak torque timing. which means that if the line is right at this 200 line here, which is indicating 0, it is at peak torque timing. What that means is that the engine's timing at that RPM, including centrifugal advance, is perfect for this RPM to produce the maximum amount of torque and thus power. And I can switch over to the timing power map to make this a little bit more obvious. This is the map that you are going to have in automation as well. And you see now that here in the mid-range, it does have to pull some timing in order to not knock. And the difference between the lines here is the fuel system's safety margin that it needs, which is, of course, also dependent on fuel system quality. And especially fuel system type. So this is EFI, basically perfect electronic control. It is less perfect than it was in the previous versions. But in the previous version, basically, in the Ellsbury update as well as patch 6 and before for the Rilma update, basically what happened was that every fuel system had perfect, like better than reality, options to massage timing at every point in the fuel map, at every throttle, at every RPM, to be exactly what it needs to be. And then the way we did fudge it, so that it's still somewhat realistic, is that we did give various fuel systems different penalties to octane. So a single barrel carb would have an octane offset of like 15 octane or something. And that would mean that you would not be able to run as much compression and such compared to a direct injection system. And basically that results roughly in the right thing. So, which you also see from the forums not being ablaze with hate about timing and such, because it did kind of work. But now we're going the extra mile here and have added the mechanic of actually having this simulated. But now, this is the perfect match, right? Now let's see what this looks like for a much more crude setup. Alright, this is what we're seeing here. I have now chosen the equivalent of a 1-barrel carb with no vacuum advance. Then that is something that I should mention as well. These mechanics that you see here are split into both centrifugal advance as well as vacuum advance. So at lower throttle settings, you can have a vacuum advance, which will make it such that if you have an underpressure in the manifold, then it will try to advance your timing to get the most out of it. Because at lower pressures, you are less likely to run into knock. And you can increase the efficiency of the engine by basically firing it a little earlier, because the flame front will take a while longer to propagate properly. So again, you can see the little thin line here is your optimal curve, the theoretical curve that you should have for your timing compared to peak torque timing, which is an imaginary straight line here that is just horizontal at 200 in this case. And what the carb now models and runs with is the thick line. And unfortunately it's a little hidden behind here, but you see it has only one inflection point right there, and it's just going straight line, straight line. And it is not making use of your of decent timing here. It can't go to the peak torque timing in this spot, despite there being more than enough margin for it. Like perfectly, it would always try to keep its safety margin along the curve with the same shape of the curve that is underneath, the little one there, the optimal timing. But it can't do that, because mechanically it is not that advanced. So yeah, I'm increasing the cam profile. You see how it's moving a little closer and becomes better at dealing with this, because it's not falling off as hard towards the end. But this gap basically means that you are going to lose efficiency and power at the top end unless your engine is quite aggressively tuned to keep its volumetric efficiency up at higher RPM. The yellow curve here is showing you the volumetric efficiency of the engine. And this concept gives us a fair bit of customizability for what the fuel systems are and what they do. So, for instance, with a single barrel carb, we then have, or we choose to only have the super simple one inflection point mechanical advance, as well as no vacuum advance. So the carbs will naturally suck at giving you optimal timing for what your engine would require. But if you are going further to more advanced systems, and let me choose something that has vacuum, vacuum advance. Can we even see that properly? Well, we would be able to see that somehow in the brake-specific fuel consumption. But yeah, let's make a one with more inflection points here. Alright, so here I have chosen one that has 3 inflection points. So if I now increase the compression, you will see them emerge and try to hug the curve as best they can. And this is looking a lot better than the previous one. I've also reduced the margin to just 2 octane basically. And yes, it still can't deal with this end of it. This is in need of either EFI or mechanical fuel injection, which is also quite nice because it sets mechanical fuel injection apart from the various carburetors as well as EFI. And I have added vacuum advance to this one, so if we walk through some of the throttle settings here, you do see here at 40% throttle that it can deal with a certain amount of under pressure and keep it correct to the general curve, the optimal curve for timing. So basically here we start to build vacuum going forwards in RPM. It follows the curve continuously, quite smoothly, until a breakpoint there where there's starting to be too much vacuum to have even more advance. It just can't deal with that. It has a certain range limitation. There are also 2 different levels of vacuum advance that are selectable. Well, not for you selectable, but that are a property of the fuel systems that you can select. And you see here that it fails and just goes to its normal, sorry mate, I can't advance timing more than this. What it would like to try here is that as soon as it gets to this point, it would like to stay there on the peak torque timing line. But it can't, because it can't advance timing more, shifting this line upwards. It's not possible because it has a limited range. So as you can see here, this new system is way closer to what happens in reality, and we think that this will give us better fidelity in producing realistic results once this is all properly tuned than our previous fudge factors that worked reasonably well for what they were. I'm certainly not regretting having that system, but this obviously is quite a bit more advanced. Another nice addition that is coming your way in terms of options to select from in the engine designer is continuous variable valve lift. And the system that is being implemented here is one where it's a little fudged, I have to say. But basically what is happening is that you do have a range of cam profiles available to you where it's not changing the cam profile in the continuous variable valve lift, but rather it's just changing the lift. It's pushing down the cam harder or less hard depending on what situation the engine is in, which has various advantages and also disadvantages, because added weight, less reliability, more stuff that can go wrong, and so on, and more friction. But what it does is, let me just get this somewhat right, there. If I cycle through the settings, this is VVL. And what you can see there is this harsh little step, which you all are aware of. VVL remains the way it was, and VVL is the performance option that you still would want to go for, because there is one major drawback to the system that we have implemented as continuous VVL. And that is that it can't change duration. It just can push the same profile further down. So if we now switch to continuous, you see here that you get a wider torque band, and it's smooth. There are no steps in there and so on. And compare this now to no VVL, and you see that, yeah, that curve dies earlier. So you have a nice, mostly economy-focused thing that helps you get better efficiency at very low flows through the engine, and a little bit of an extension of your power band as well towards the high end, but not as much as you'd think, because it is very limited in what it mechanically actually does to the cam profile. So again, let's go through it. This is standard, no VVL. Here you have VVL, and then here you have continuous VVL, and back to none. And you see it's making a decent chunk of change. And one thing that you do not see is that it actually does increase efficiency as well to some extent, especially at low throttle settings. This will be a little hard to see in the graph to the left there, but let's see. You should probably will see it down here in this range that is at slight under pressures, because it is now tied to manifold absolute pressure as well. So basically, if you are running into lower than atmospheric pressure, which means the throttle is somewhat closed, what it is doing is that it reduces lift so that you get a higher velocity stream of the airflow into the engine combustion chamber, so that you still have decent mixing going on there. And that helps combustion efficiency, for instance. So let's have another look here. So this is none, then we have VVL, you see the market split in there, and then we have the CVVL. And you see you're all reaching slightly higher efficiencies, and it is shifting the curve downwards as well. Oh, well, downwards in terms of the good stuff. The green area goes down, which means towards under pressure, which is cool. So basically now we have a no VVL standard, a performance option, which is VVL, still as good as ever. You can set the point and the high cam profile. And then we have CVVL, where you can't set anything. You just choose your normal cam, and it increases your range and makes it a bit more economical for quite a bit of engineering time, as well as a hit to reliability and weight. Another thing that you will find revamped in patch number 7 is the throttle response calculations. They have been a little odd in places and not fully fleshed out in others. And that is going to change now, as now it's not going to only be dependent on the fuel map settings and some fudge factors for various forced induction systems, but rather we are going to have it be calculating based on some actual characteristics of the forced induction system. For instance, let me pull up a turbo. When you're dealing with turbos, not every turbo is the same in terms of throttle response. While a small turbo would be quite responsive, a large one, compared to engine size, certainly would not be. But how can that factor into throttle response, you ask? Well, one thing that I'm doing, and okay, that's not showing correctly there. I see it in my debug data though. Currently it is at 0.463, and the aspiration type is a factor of 0.477, which means that in this case the turbo is basically cutting the throttle response in half. But as you can see, it is a pretty big one that spools late. So I was wondering, how can we improve this without too much complication? And with the simulation having all the data available, the way I decided would be a good approach to calculate this is to see how much is flowing through the wastegate of the turbocharger compared to the spool flow of the turbine. Because that gives you a hint at how saturated the system is. If you were to close down the throttle a little and reduce mass flow, would there still be enough mass flow available if you opened up the throttle again to get it running? And that can be, well, approximated by looking at that flow through the wastegate at full throttle. And that is exactly what we're doing here now. So that means that if you have a smaller turbo that spools earlier and thus also has a more saturated turbine, then this factor will increase. And in this instance, well, you can see the 5 there, but it's a little in. This is now at, instead of 477, it's at 581. So quite a bit increased there already. Let's say a 20% gain for these turbos comparatively. Superchargers, by their very nature, have a pretty good throttle response, not as responsive as a naturally aspirated engine would be, but still very close to it. So they only have a very small penalty that also doesn't really depend on the size, because the response is more or less instantaneous with the way it works, forcing the air straight via gearing into the engine instead of a feedback loop. There's also a small factor, in terms of small, I don't mean it's multiplying things down a lot, but rather a small factor which is close to 1 for the intercooler size. If you slap a massive intercooler on something, then the system overall will be a little bit slower to respond than with a small intercooler. But that's a minor nuance. Then we have the new continuous variable valve lift, which also is going to take a notch out of it. And of course the fuel map still affects things just as it does before, but now here we have the opportunity to see what this already does. Well, I think you have it in the latest patch, don't you? What it already does to the lambda map as we progress through it. So let me show you the emissions optimization there, and you can see how it's now on a larger scale, because we're running a turbo engine, how it reacts to the higher map readings of the turbo. And that mostly comes into effect at values beyond 70. So now here sitting at 60. And increasing further, you can see that it's being pushed up more and more, the emissions optimization. There we go into the turbo zone, where you can get perfectly stoichiometric running, well, if your fuel system allows for it, that is, up to about 1.5 bar, well, slightly below, 1.4 bars of boost. No, 1.4 bars of absolute pressure. Alright, probably the last thing I want to touch on right now that is going to be included in patch number 7, and that is the fuel cut. So previously, this fuel map, the lambda map, was just that. It's extended to all operating conditions of the engine, which also meant that at 0 throttle at 7,000 RPM, you would still be injecting fuel into the engine, which is not what happens in real life. So what now finally got implemented is a fuel cut. And that fuel cut also is dependent on the manifold absolute pressure. There's so many beautiful things you can do with manifold absolute pressure. So what really happens then is that, well, at idle and stuff, of course it doesn't want to cut anything, but if you are running into conditions where it's really starting to pull hard vacuum, it just cuts out the fuel entirely, and that is basically what you see here with the blackened out area. So for the cycle tests that we have, that will mean two things. Better fuel economy during engine braking, as well as better emissions overall for the cars. And there's one last little thing that I want to touch on before we wrap up. There are, of course, many changes more that I haven't talked about that are coming, and many fixes too, as 1 month of development time does go places. But one more thing that will be quite visible is a change to demographics, as that was something that was requested and deemed not only viable but probably also better for gameplay. So, do you spot the one that is new? Yes, you probably do. It's the MPV demographic, which does have a seat range requirement of 6 to 9. So it's a proper large family car with a little bit of utility, but mostly about practicality and some comfort, drivability, yeah, but also quite safe. So it belongs in the family segment, really, and it replaces the pony budget demographic. Because that one was a little bit odd, and what has happened here is a bit of reshuffle that makes the a proper progression from pony to muscle premium, in that the pony demographic no longer wants sedans but rather coupes. So it's a proper pony car demographic now, and this one has been adjusted accordingly to fit it's basically like one of those triplets here where you have budget, normal and premium, and you can see that for the muscle, premium, muscle and pony there in the reverse order. One thing to note here, which is different to the normal progression, is that it is also about size. Pony cars tend to be the smaller muscle car. So that is something that is going to play quite a bit better, I believe, than what we had before with a sedan, pony budget and sedan ponies. But that also means that with the new MPV demographic, we have to address what passenger fleet is. Because that one was previously the only demographic that was really about lots of seats and used the people mover body type. That is now different, as we are looking for a sedan in this one now. So it's a proper kind of police, taxi, whatever, Uber kind of demographic. So still extremely reliable, but focused on safety and comfort and drivability and a lot of economy. So lots of good stuff in there. It's kind of generic, but extremely focused on the reliability. And with that, I think we can wrap it up here, as that is plenty of changes coming your way. It's still a bit out there, as we have not gone into the closed testing phase for all these features yet. There's still a little bit of cleanup to do here and there. And once we know, we are going to tell you. So, for the question when, I can only give you very rough estimates, and it will be at least 2 weeks, because that is how long testing takes. If for whatever reason we tomorrow decide that, oh no, this is now all working all of a sudden, then it can go into testing very quick, and then we have to retest the engines so that performance doesn't take a hit or goes haywire in the positive power direction. And also we need to test campaigns so that you don't lose too much progress while you are in the alpha trying to do some new campaign games, because that always sucks. But that is something that you definitely do need to consider if you want to start a campaign. Don't get too attached to it, because it might get balked. Anyway, I don't want to end on that note necessarily, but that is the reality of it, isn't it? So, I hope you enjoyed today's not so little dev update, and I shall see you guys next time.